Thank you very much, Mr. Rector Magnificus. Highly learned opponents, family members, friends, colleagues, thank you for coming to my defense, which is called A Time to Enrol, A Time to Stop, and goes over policies, perceptions and practices influencing the right to basic education in Yemen. Before I go any further, I would like to give some short explanations of some aspects of this thesis. One of the things is that my thesis and my research has focused on, we call it drop out of school. However, if you read my thesis, you will not find the word dropout, because quite early on in my research, and actually before that already, is that children don't, and their parents don't really share this word dropout. They see it as stopping school. They don't see it as a process with an end, as we see it. So throughout my thesis, you will not see the word dropout, school dropout, but you will see stopping school. And that's also one of the reasons why I undertook this research, because I've been a development worker for a long time, and we often were working around schools, and we thought, okay, we have the schools, we have some female teachers in the schools, and they have the time to go to school, and then they don't finish school. Why is that? The other thing is that the research focused on basic education. Basic education was a term which came into being during the time of the whole movement of education for all, whereby basic education was identified as quite a wide thing. But if you look at it now in practice, then most of it has been narrowed down to 9 years of schooling, 9 grades, so the first 9 grades of schooling. So the first 6 years of primary school and the first 3 years of secondary school. You can also see that I focus on rights, right to education. This is very much the most dominant approach in education development, I think, also for my own organization. And that's why I focused specifically on this approach, the rights-based approach to development. So, in general, my research questions focused around why do children stop school? Why don't they continue? So I looked at the meanings of stopping school, who are these children who stop school, and why do they decide to stop school, and what is the role of schools in stopping school. Of course, as an education development worker, I'm especially interested in how this interferes with education development practice. My theoretical starting points for the research that I used were very much that education in childhood is seen as social phenomena and social problems, and that the inequalities of schooling outcomes is a social problem. And one of the important aspects in my research and also in the theories is that children are seen as social actors by themselves, and therefore they're at the heart of my research. Most of the information I got from the children themselves. And all these things are also reflected in the rights-based approach to education development. My research used a combination of qualitative and quantitative research, and I started with quantitative research to get trends, and then the qualitative research was used to better understand these trends. And one of the things we have to take into consideration is that the sample I used for this research is not the average Yemeni child, because the average many children in Yemen do not have access to school. So all these children who are involved in this research had actually access to a school. They were already going to school, but the problem was, why did they not continue? I think that my findings, which can be shortened to 3 main findings, are important and challenging for existing knowledge and practice. The 3 findings can be summarized as the first finding is that views of stopping school differ between those who plan, like the education development agencies, those who actually implement it, like teachers, and those who use the system, like children and parents. The second finding is that I found that stopping school of a child, so the schooling outcome of a child, at that point in time now plays a role in the social positioning of adults. Yeah, so these adults are different people. The other aspect of the other finding I think is important is the teacher behavior. You can see that it follows kind of discriminatory practices following gender and status or class. But at the same time, there's another aspect to it which goes beyond that. So and that's very much connected to the power position of the teacher. So it goes beyond gender and the traditional class issues. So in terms of the first finding that there are different views, I suppose that's not very surprising. However, the problem for me is that often the views of the Education Development Actors are kind of they are left unquestioned and they are identified as best, and we have to, the rest has to follow. But is that kind of correct? I mean, there is like, because the way we view education and stopping school and school completion is based on certain assumptions which are not shared by others. For example, basic education equals basic schooling. I think there's a difference between education and schooling. Can the right to education be fulfilled through free and compulsory schooling, or is that a contradiction in terms? The important numbers in childhood and development we bring in because of schooling is not shared by the people themselves. And then the role of schooling in the transition to adulthood. We often think that's a very important role. The schooling helps the child to transform into adulthood, but the children in Yemen don't see that way. And then of course the whole purpose of schooling. There's a difference in what they think and what we think. In terms of the second finding, of social positioning, you can see that the social positioning of the adult competes with the amount and the number of grades the child completes. And part of it is to safeguard social reproduction in the future, but it is very much an issue now. Yeah? The social positioning of adults now is important. And it includes all sorts of people. It's not only the powerful people like the fathers, but also the mothers. And the teachers are there. I think all three findings, but especially also this one on social positioning, is reinforced by the actually by this present situation. The present situation in Yemen, you may know, is that there is civil unrest, and the school starts to have not only a social role but also a political role. And you can see that these kind of things reinforce each other. In regard to the teachers' behaviors, I mean, you can see clearly that it kind of follows the gender and the class and the status issues, but then also this individual aspect to it. And that's very much connected to the safeguarding of the teacher's own position in society. And especially in Yemen, and at the moment, the civil unrest, but also because of the promises not being kind of, the promises made by the government in regards to schooling are not really kept. People are getting more and more disappointed with education. That means that the position of the teacher is getting more and more threatened. So they have even more reason to kind of try to keep their position. And like what I said before, that is even stronger also now with the civil unrest. I think that these findings have implications for practice and policy, and especially if we want to use the rights-based approach. And so, and it highlights certain issues that we maybe have to consider and think further through. And it might need more research, but still. Like, we have to think of imposing views and accepting different views. Is there space for more views? What is this role of numbers? How do we make use of it in a rights-based approach? What is the purpose of schooling and for whom? For us, for the children, for whom? What is the role of costs? Costs play such an important role at the moment in the different types of programs we do. But it didn't come out of my research as a very important issue. The role of power position of teachers, the role they kind of, the power